So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Penn State Startup Week 2021. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Hermes Frangoudis, who's going to talk about user testing and building AI experiences. And this is an important subject because it's by conducting user testing that we can best ensure the success of emerging technologies. So our speaker, Hermes, is a Senior Developer Evangelist at Agora.io. He's leading Agora's developer education initiatives. And in his role, he leads a team focused on creating guides and demos for developers leveraging real-time engagement-based technologies, such as live streaming and video communication. And Hermes has very rich industrial experiences. Prior to joining Agora, he was the leader solutions engineer for Blippar's New York team, specialized in building web and mobile apps that leverages augmented reality, computer vision, and other emerging technologies. So please join me in welcoming Hermes Frangoudis.
Thank you, Xingjing. Let me share my screen real quick. So as mentioned, today I'm going to be talking about user testing and building AR experiences. So a little bit about who I am. Currently, I'm a manager of developer relations at Agora. Agora is a startup that focuses on building APIs to better empower developers to build like voice video chat for their own applications. So if you wanted to build Zoom-like functionality into your app, you would use something like Agora. And before joining Agora, I was a solutions engineer at Blippar. And what that meant was we built AR experiences for customers, worked on the SDK, built demos, that sort of thing. So very focused on this emerging technology. And that really goes into the beginning of my presentation. So while at Blippar, there were a lot of challenges because at the time, AR was fairly new. I got the role in 2015. The company had been around for just a couple of years at that point. It was before Apple released their AR kit, before Google really released AR Core, before Snapchat had, the vomiting rainbows and the face filters. So for us, a lot of it was, how do you educate the user? How do you understand how they're going to react with a technology that no one's ever used before? So AR was this new medium. People weren't used to the steps and motions. So picking up your phone and pointing it at something and hoping things would happen. The concepts of scanning and tracking just weren't there. So like, how do you educate and guide people in this sense? Because you're deploying something that you're just hoping people figure out how to use. There's no, hey, I'm going to be there and watch this person do it. When this goes into production, it's just shipped and you hope that people figure it out, right? Which is a really poor way of going about a product. That's not, something that we promote. So how do you take that back and learn to be your own user? And that's something that we really had to learn at Blippar, because we're talking about teens to adults, like every nationality. People are on poor Wi-Fi, so if this thing's not loading, they're just going to give up and walk away. They have different devices. So these are a lot of the challenges we faced just as an industry whole. And when AR Kit rolled out and face filters rolled out, some of these things just became easier. But until we had that opportunity, until those things happened, we didn't really have that opportunity to like fall back on that. So what's user testing look like? Probably in school. I understand that this is probably really dated, considering when I went to Penn State IST, we had one semester course on HCI. We didn't have a whole major. So distilling it down to like the one semester wireframe, I guess you'd call it. You would have really low fidelity wireframes, mock-ups, paper prototypes, and then you put it in front of a user and see how they react. And You can interview them, you could record their screen, you could really go through and understand this. Whereas at an AR startup, half this stuff was under NDA. You couldn't show anybody. So you end up missing this whole chunk of like paper prototype and, you know, detailed interviews and being able to record these things. At the time, like screen recording on your mobile phone was not the easiest thing. You had to have a third-party app. It only worked on Androids. It was quite the mess. So we learned to really become our own users. You know, the 2D design team would come up with the wireframes, and we would have hand-selected team members throughout from different groups. Like we had someone from QA, we had someone who wasn't involved on the design from the design team. We had, you know, 2 to 3 developers, and we just tear through the wireframe and say, you know, if I'm here, how do I get there? Or what happens if I click that? And really challenging your teammates, because you're the first line of defense there. Right? Before this ever comes out, before you can say to someone, can you look at this and tell me if this makes sense? It has to make sense to you as a developer, someone that really understands the platform. But that's also a pitfall, right? Like you know so much about it that it's like, well, how do I become objective? And the objectiveness comes up with like when you create mock-ups, then going to other team members. Usually we would pick, you know, people on the business team because they weren't technical at all. So you could show them something and be like, hey, can you try this out? And just sit there and watch. Like, what did they click? You know, if you could ask them a question without leading them, which is, you know, very difficult to ask, is like, why'd you do that? You know, did something cause you to not think about this? So these were just examples of things that we did within the team. A couple example projects that I could really point out was the Porsche Boxster. So in 2016, we, as a company, were commissioned by Porsche to help launch or help announce the launch of the new 2017 Porsche Boxster. And they wanted to do it in a very interesting way that would get people excited about this car. Also M&Ms, when they launched the caramel M&M. You know, that was quite a few years ago, but at the time they wanted to make a big splash. So we'll go through each of those. For the Porsche Boxster project, you know, one of the biggest hurdles we faced was, you know, the ad itself is a 5-page pullout. So like getting the user to open it to the page and see this CTA in the bottom right-hand corner that kind of walk them through, okay, point it here, scan. And what we came to realize is like, this thing's massive. So if people are pointing it real close, it doesn't make sense. Or if they're like super far away, it's really hard to keep everything in frame. And the only reason we were able to do that was build a prototype where you scanned it and just like an image showed up on the marker. I guess for anyone that's not familiar with AR terminology, the marker is the image that has the feature points of interest to the camera. So when you point your phone at it, the camera lens sees this, picks up all the pixel differentiations and says, okay, I recognize this. And now I can, you know, stick some 3D to it. But in the world of, you know, AR, it matters what part you're pointing it at. So if you think about it, the page was, you know, I have to back up to show you how big it was. It was like this big. And people trying to scan it, it just wasn't working. So how did we figure this out? We came up with these prototypes, different marker sizes, you know, really rough designs. The goal was to mimic this little car on the screen and drive through the Goddard Pass in augmented reality. So we created a simple path, you know, what buttons made sense. Porsche wanted this like feel like you're racing up the mountain, but when you gave people the ability to like gas and brake and turn, it was very confusing to the end user. Like our prototypes, you know, showed this. Users were driving off the track. They weren't able to hit all the points. So we actually toned back the experience and made it more like the old RC cars on a fixed track, and looking at it instead of like the user's not really controlling the animation the way they think, but we're giving them the idea or the perception that they are. They tap a button and this thing moves. They don't have to steer. They don't have to do anything. They tap another button, it slows down. And we realized that that simplicity was what made this more fun. The other part of it was figuring out how do we educate the person to only point it at a certain area. So we broke the 5 pages up into two-page chunks. And when the camera picked up on a 2-page chunk, it popped up this big, placard that said, for best experience, keep the outline area and focused around the advertisement. And this loaded really quick, so we didn't lose users because the experience was heavy on 3D. And one of the things we learned at Blippar is when you're triggering an AR experience, if it doesn't load within the first 30 to 60 seconds, you're going to lose half your audience. If it takes 60 seconds or more, once someone uses it, you're going to lose half that audience within the first few seconds, because they're going to be like, this wasn't as cool as I thought it'd be. So the challenge here was, how can we get this to be like really responsive? I scan and pop, this thing's there. There's like no load time. And then after a few seconds, you see this all kind of fade out. The mountain comes in, and in the background, we're buying ourselves this time. So I show you this very simple educational piece. And in the background, I'm downloading all the heavy stuff. So when this disappears, the next piece feels very fluid and there's not that like breaking. Because we found when you're doing something very complex and you're moving between what we called scenes, almost like a play. When you go to watch a play, the changing between scenes is very quick, right? Like sometimes we'll just rotate a piece of on-set furniture and it becomes a completely different thing. So we had to take a similar approach in this sense. And one of the really cool things we saw was, because it was so simple and fun, this experience was scanned on average 3 times per user. The user spent somewhere between 3 and 4 minutes, and it led to a double in the increase in the number of test drives for Porsche. So you can see from like this little advertisement that you're like, who's gonna interact with this? But it's not always about understanding who's going to do this. It's saying, okay, there's clearly an audience for this. How do we engage with them? And don't have your stigmas of like, oh, no one's going to do this because I wouldn't do it. There's so many things in technology that I wouldn't be into that are huge. TikTok. I've never TikToked in my life, but that is probably one of the biggest platforms out there. And it's that stickiness, that feeling that it's easy to use and you don't need to know anything because it guides you through, that really makes things fun for the people that they are aimed at, like for their audiences. So on Porsche, we learned all about, education and making sure you're there. So something like the caramel M&M launch, this is a big event. It's a one-day event. And to make sure people knew how to do it, we brought in, or M&M's brought in based on our feedback, third-party people to stand by and help people scan. We preloaded the experiences, so there was no like worry of downloading and things like that. But there were still challenges on the user side because this is a one-day event. If we got there and something broke or didn't work right or just wasn't easy, there's no time to fix it. Right? the ball starts rolling and there's no way to stop it. And to make it even more pressure was, this launched in the center of Times Square. So when you think all eyes on you, it really was all eyes on you, because M&M's rented out Times Square, closed it off, and people could see the engagement and were just funneling through. And the way we really learned was to go to Times Square, set up a lot of tests, picking people on the street and saying, hey, can you scan this? Does this make sense? And here's a picture of one of my coworkers, Alan, testing out our assumptions. Like, if I'm super tall or I'm far away, can I still scan this? Can I still make this work? Picking people off the street and saying, hey, can you do this? And at the time, it was pre-pandemic, it's Times Square, people are very friendly. So people are like, yeah, sure, whatever. And we learned a lot just by observing how they interacted with like a simple prototype. And here on the right, you can see what the prototype looks like. It was just like a little box that came out. We had even less, fidelity to it, I think, at the time. This is taken from one of our follow-up tests. So what we learned here was just be there, wear your hat, and bring in, random people, because at a bigger company, when you're talking about human and computer interactions, and you're talking about human-centered design, there's entire teams focused on this, and they take that prototype paper mocks and they go through it. My friend Alan now, he works at Coach, and I've consulted with them a few times, and to watch it, how different it is. You get the 2D designers, you still rip it apart in that sense, but then it gets just shipped off to a completely separate team. And that team brings in users, they do controlled tests, control environments, NDAs, and seeing it at a big company, it's like, wow, that's how it should be done. Unfortunately, when you're in, a 30-person startup, that's not always the realism. But the cool part about being in a 30-person startup is you can affect change. And if you have these concepts and know and understand them and can implement them, that's really where you can, make a difference in helping further the product. Otherwise, people don't have these skills. They're just throwing stuff at walls and hoping it sticks, if you catch the saying. A lot of AR has come like a long way. Facebook, if you notice, they have their face filters. Snapchat has their face filters. And some of the things that you'll notice is like they limit it to 4 megabytes. This is really crucial because it's all about the download time. 4 megabytes, no matter where you are and what kind of connection, has a relatively quick download time. If you're on 5G, it's like instant. If you're on 3G, it's only a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds, 40 seconds max. So we see things that we learned early on getting applied in much bigger corporations. So it's very interesting in that sense. I no longer am in the AR world full time. It's more of a hobby for me. So I like to keep up and play around. Where I work now is an API company. We focus on real-time engagement. So enabling developers to add voice and video, to chat to their applications. And some of the challenges we still face, like we're developer focused, but not all developers are the same level. You have a beginner developer, you have an advanced developer. They speak tons of different languages, like iOS, Android, Flutter, and they come from a wide range of demographics. So like some are just starting their career as teens. Some are just starting their careers as adults. Others have been doing it since they were teens and now they're adults, right? And a lot of the challenges we face there is like, how do you bring all that together in a way that's easy for people to consume? And this is a screenshot from our doc center. If you landed on this page, my question to you is, would you know where to start? There's a lot of information. And this is one of the places that we saw a lot of feedback coming in is like, I can't find this. I can't find that. And so what's user testing look like at an API startup? Now Agora is a publicly traded company, but when I first started there a couple of years ago, we were a scrappy little startup. We were, 50 people in the California office. And I was one of the one of the early remote hires. And so how do you understand, like, what's the user into? How are they faring with it? So we've, at an API startup, you don't really have mockups. It's all about like having a wireframe of how the organization of the API is laid out. And then from there, you roll out a prototype, which is actually your beta program. So we recruit some of our more senior users, like people that we have in our Slack forum that are very familiar with our APIs and the functionality of our SDK. We say, hey, we're getting ready to launch this new feature. Can you take it for a test drive? Here's the beta SDK. And with that comes surveys, because we're not there while they're implementing it. It could take them 20 hours to implement a feature, if they get lost in some nitty detail. So for us, it's not about being able to sit down with them, but being able to still collect that information. Here's a survey. How easy was this function to use? How easy was that? Where do you think we could improve? And from there, we take those surveys, and the ones that gave us anywhere from like a 6 or below, or a 7 or below on a scale of 10, we would say those people are worth interviewing. Anyone that gave 8, 9, 10, they get it. To them, our mapping of how it should be set up and their mapping of how they understand it makes complete sense. But for the people that rated us low, there's a disconnect. And being able to like really drill deeper into that disconnect and understand through interviews what wasn't clear. Oh, you got to this point, but then you missed this point, or you didn't understand how to get to the next part. And recording that. So being able to, first you have to ask them, obviously, you can't just record a video chat, but being able to record them and pass that information along to the engineering teams. Say, hey, this is a user. The words coming straight out of their mouth of the pain points they were feeling. And that doesn't stop at the prototype or the beta. Like even after release, we're constantly putting out surveys, trying to understand like, where are the pain points? Are you struggling with documentation? Do you struggle with the guides? And from there, we follow up again with detailed interviews. And one of the learnings we found was a lot of the information is there, but it's not presented in an easy to consume way. So one of my initiatives, which just launched last week, is the new Developer Resources Center for the company. And what we aim to do is organize all the information we have in the docs, but with more clear entry points. So what you saw on the left-hand side was this long menu, which makes sense to a more advanced user. We looked at it as a new user and said, I don't even know what to click. Like, yeah, this says get started, but like, what about this guide? What about this basic thing? What's an advanced feature? And just overwhelming the developer and taking the feedback and being able to understand that we had overwhelmed the developer, and how do we break it down and make it easier to funnel. Is this the best way? No, but we're going to look at this developer resources page. We're going to look at the metrics for clicks all throughout the top level buttons. So in the upper right-hand corner, we have quick links. In the bottom, we have start building. Once you drill in, there's other buttons to click through, and getting more of a metrics-based understanding of the journey, right? Understanding, oh, this user clicked here, clicked here, clicked here, but then they dropped off. Or this user clicked here, and it seems like they got what they needed. So a lot of it is first putting yourself as the new user and trying really hard to take out of your mind everything you knew about the project, right? Like if I looked at this with fresh eyes and I had no clue, what would I do? And to me, that's the most simplest, basic starting point for the user testing and understanding like a human-centered design is how would I move forward if I didn't know anything about this? And then from there you can refine and tool, but like that one first entry point is huge. So I've been talking now for about 25 minutes or so. I want to say thank you to everyone and open this up for a chance to be more interactive in Q&A, because I think that's really the fun part of Startup Week.
Thank you so much, Hermes. Really nice presentation and really fun projects. And I really like how you compare the startup company versus those big company which has independent designer team. I personally also learned a lot. So everyone, please feel free to type your questions.
I'll stop sharing so that it's easier to see.
Okay, yeah, feel free to send the questions to the chat. You don't have to like ask questions related to user testing. I mean, if you have any other questions related, for instance, job hunting, or why to choose a certain company to work, and so on. Oh, Nicholas has a question. How did you initially get started being interested in AR? You muted yourself.
Sorry. That's a great question, Nicholas. I actually have Startup Week to thank for that. When I was an undergraduate at Penn State, it used to be called IST Startup Week, and Pam will remember this. And at the time, I was still an intern. I was interning with the College of IST, and one of the initiatives was find a cool new way to help market Startup Week. And digging through, I came across like innovative ways to do marketing, and one of them was augmented reality. At the time, it was so new. Like I would say, people, hey, I'm looking, I'm joining an AR company or an augmented reality company, and people would just look at me like I had 10 heads because no one understood what that even meant, especially my parents or older family members. So it really started at Startup Week. I had met them, approached them about doing something for Startup Week. The team was super nice. Everyone was really nice. And after graduation, or not even after, after graduation, I applied. Long story short, I had a job earlier in the year that fell through, and then after graduation is when I found out it had fallen through. So I was applying and just kind of fell into it. Surprisingly enough, it kind of became like a life's passion. Like I'm so gung-ho about augmented reality. Is there a great website to find jobs on new startups? So Jimmy, that's a good question. When I started looking, to be honest, I didn't find a good website for it. Like, there's Indeed and Monster and all that. But the way I applied to Blippar was just going on their website and looking at the careers page and hitting, apply. And at the time, when I was a senior at Penn State, I had gotten a tentative offer, a verbal offer, I guess, from a company called Razorfish. They had a new team out in Ohio that they were building up. And for whatever reason, they decided not to hire. So after graduation, I was like, Startup Week seemed cool. I applied to Weebly. Those guys are awesome. I know a bunch of people from my year that went and worked for Weebly, and it was really cool. But it got me thinking, like, why don't I just look at like Dropbox and Box and like all these brand new companies? If you just go on their careers page, usually they have a hiring there. A lot of them are using LinkedIn now. That's kind of like the big one. But to be honest, like some startups just don't have, the reach. So they kind of just post it on their website and post it on their LinkedIn and hope people find it. You could go through a recruiter, things like that. But it's like, if you see a company you like, just go look and see how you can apply. That's my greatest advice. Nicholas, so if a user can't really answer why of their struggle with a certain feature, how do you approach recording that issue? It's a great question. To be honest, I would just put it as like, can't explain, but then on the next test, be more poignant about it. Did you struggle with this? Or did you find this feature relatively easy? And if they found it easy, you can understand, I guess you can't really understand anything if they found it easy. If they struggled, you hope that they maybe can explain it better. But if someone can't explain something, it's really like trying to draw blood from stone. Like you don't want to discourage them. You don't want to really pressure them. If someone can't say why, you just, unable to respond to this. And if you get a lot of those unable to say why, you should start rethinking your approach to whatever that feature is, because people don't always know why it doesn't make sense, but they know it doesn't make sense, which is really kind of like a weird thing to say, but things aren't always so easy to articulate, especially when you're dealing with someone that's not super technical or not super understanding of the space you're in. They just know I can't use this. I don't know. I click the button, it doesn't work. That's what you'll get sometimes, and then that means you as a designer have to really dig down deep and say, what am I doing wrong? What did I miss here? What can I give more of to help the user understand that this is a piece that they need to connect here to there? Yeah, and Emily brings up a great point. Like, what do you expect to happen? And this is something that we actually do a lot of at Agora. It's like people go, I got a bug, like this just doesn't work. And we ask, okay, what are the steps you've taken to implement this feature? What do you expect to happen? And then what's actually happening? Then you start to see kind of like this gap, and they don't have to tell you why it's a struggle. It's like, this is what they expect and this is what's happening. You can piece together why it's not lining up like that. But yeah, Emily, great feedback. Anyone in the class have their own startup? I know when I was at Penn State, I had, my own idea that, to be honest, failed miserably, and it was kind of hard to tell myself, but at the end of the day, it happens. It happens more often than you think. Even a company like Blippar, when I joined, they had just raised a Series C. They had raised over like $150 million at that, they had just raised their Series C was another 75 million that put them in this like 100+ million range. They were considered a unicorn. 3.5 years in, $150 burned, the company went bankrupt. And there was just nothing we could do about it. And no matter how hard you work, you're not the only piece of the puzzle. You're not the only support or cog in the wheel. So if not everything is strengthened and working fluidly together, it could fail because of that. And you shouldn't let that discourage you. When I went to get my new job, they asked me, like, oh, what makes you uncomfortable? Because you're saying learning something new doesn't make you uncomfortable. Learning that doesn't make you uncomfortable. Well, what does make you uncomfortable? And at the time it was, job security and being able to look, this interviewer in the face and say that no matter how hard I work, no matter how good I am at my job, I know that it's not going to survive. In 1 month, I will have no job, but I still have to show up every day and do my work like it's going to be there. Because if you stop, then everything just falls apart and you don't have that 1 month to look. So, you shouldn't be discouraged, but you should always look at something like a learning opportunity. And that's my favorite part about startups is like you can come in on a small team, make a high impact, both negative and positive. So, you're making an impact, but you should definitely be very conscious of how is my input affecting the team and helping things grow forward. Sorry, I know that was completely unrelated, but I was hoping maybe
No.
start some conversation.
Thank you so much for sharing the experience. I think that's very touching, actually, very sincere. Actually, I don't have like question for you, but I'm just curious. Do you have the videos of the event and the Porsche Boxster? I just would like to say them. I think you really did some amazing, interesting projects, and I just want to say them.
Yeah. Give me 1 second. I actually have. So this is the Times Square. It's from one of the designers that was on the project. I'll send this in the chat. And then I don't think he was on. Porsche. A lot of the projects, if you go to his page, I was involved on a bunch of the same projects as him, but he wasn't on Porsche. So let me see if I have it here. Yes. And here's a couple clips from the Porsche experience. I'm not a designer, so you can tell very quickly that my portfolio is not nearly as visually appealing as him, but it's all about having the information there and having it be in a way that people can access. So don't ever let your shortcomings in a certain area make you feel like you can't succeed in that area. At the end of the day, you can always learn something new. And everything you see around you was built by a person. And that person at one time or another had no clue how to build the thing they built. So you should always take that as an inspiration that you can learn anything if you try hard enough. No, oh, sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, at the time when we were building AR experiences for Blippar, it was like no one had ever done any of this. So there was no Stack Overflow. There was no, there's nowhere to look. Like I had a question, I had to go figure out what's the base concept in augmented reality that I'm trying to explain. Is this implemented? There's a lot of crossover with games and game design because it's 3D and stuff like that. So we look to draw references from there. Sometimes we just make it up, make a choice. Like, this is what we think. And it wasn't always the right choice. Sometimes people struggled with the experience, and it's okay. Even if something fails, you can learn. You can learn from that failure, and it's okay to fail. Definitely try to fail on small things and not big things, because that has a bigger impact on your career. But yeah, don't be afraid to fail. Failing is not, the end of something. Oh, I failed to do this, I can't do it again. No, dust yourself off and try again until it works. And sometimes you just dust yourself off and walk away and say, I'm not going to try that again until I get XYZ figured out. Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions? Feel free to type in the chat room. This is a great opportunity for you to learn from an industry practitioner. So I have a question for you. So now, how did you prepare yourself for the job market?
So preparing myself for the job market, that was a tough one. Because I started web development and stuff when I was like 13 years old. So it wasn't really learning like the programming language, but more just understanding like, what does an interviewer want to hear? What are the right what are the questions that they're going to ask me, and how can I best prepare that answer? To be honest, I started applying to jobs that I didn't really care for, to kind of get an idea of what an interviewer was going to ask. Now there's definitely a lot more resources around, like, oh, tech interviews, here's the 50 most common questions, and being able to like solve a Tower of Hanoi, which no one in practice will ever ask you to solve the Tower of Hanoi. But in every interview you go to, they will ask you to solve the Tower of Hanoi problem, which is one of those, like, just being able to get into that mindset of, this is a little bit artificial, but it's my chance to be able to show, yes, I understand these core concepts. These are things that I can provide to the team. And one of the big things with interviewing, if you're really interested in this company, ask good questions. Like, do your homework. Make them see that you understand about their company. The worst thing you could do is walk into an interview and know nothing about the company, know very little about the role, or even ask the person, like, so like, what's the point of this role? I guess that's not really a bad question. A bad question would be just like, so what's my day-to-day look like? Actually, sorry, I keep coming back to, I'm trying to put it in such a way, because I had a recent interview with someone that, I asked them, so what questions do you have for me? And they were like stuff that came right out of the job description. If you had Googled a little bit, it was along the lines of like, what are my responsibilities? But there was no, oh, I see in the job description, it says I'll be doing this, this, and this. How does that play into the greater efforts by the organization? Because I see the organization is focused on X, Y, Z. And this interview was for Agora's app builder platform, which is more of like a no code solution. So it was for an engineer that was looking to work on the front end portion of it. And he didn't seem to know anything about like what the responsibilities were, even though they're outlined in in the job description. So that's my biggest advice, is make sure you do your homework on the companies, because it impresses them.
I have another question.
Yeah.
I think I'm just asking for my students, because I cannot know what they are interested in knowing. So were there any like on-campus career resources which you found really helpful?
Yeah, so there was, after I left Blippar and I was looking for my role at Agora, or looking for a new role, and before I found my role at Agora, I was applying to like Apple, Google. And when you apply to Google, this is just like an FYI, they first give you like a personality interview. And if you pass that, then they invite you to interview with the company. And that you could postpone that interview for as long as you want, or maybe not as long as you want, but you could postpone it for up to a year, because that's what I did at the time. They gave me homework and they're like, this is how you go through the Google interview process. And some of those bigger companies will give you that little bit of like, here's the homework you need to do to succeed, because you made that right personality click. Versus when I applied to Facebook, it was like, here's one question we're going to ask you. You have to share your screen. The camera's going to be open. There's no cheating. You have 30 minutes to answer. And there's just no preparing for that. It's like you could do all the Tower of Hanoi and test questions you want, but I feel like those kind of interviews is just no real preparation. It's like you either know it or you don't. And I failed that. It was one of those like, if you could buy Bitcoin today for XYZ price and sell it a day after or some other day, how do you find the best day to purchase and the best day to sell? And we know that this is recursive function that grows. There's two ways to do it. You could do like n squared, or there's another way to do it like n minus 1. And I could see the n squared, but I couldn't see the n minus 1. And to be honest, I probably should have had like someone standing next to me and just speaking it out, because later on, like 2 days later, I'm at dinner trying to articulate to my mom and my wife, or my fiance at the time, yeah, this is the problem I had, and this is the way I was thinking. And it was one of those like, oh, I completely forgot about this piece. But I was so nervous. I was so overworked by like I can't prepare for this. That I couldn't think clearly. And maybe that's the thing I should have learned from that, is like, think more clearly and calm yourself. Try to be relaxed during these coding challenges, because they are stressful and they're meant for you to understand like how you react in that stress. Are you good at it? If you're not, then maybe that role isn't the best, if this is like the interview process.
So do you have any other advice that you would like to offer to students, especially those who would like to pursue a career in a startup company?
Sorry, I have my puppies here making some noise, if you hear that.
Oh.
My advice, if you're pursuing a career in the startup world, is be ready for long nights, be ready for things to hit the fan and it feel like everything's going to go sideways. Be ready for 30 projects at once. It's like college where they just assign you tons of work. And if you don't raise your hand, if you don't go to the professor, no one's going to know that you're drowning, because so many other people are drowning that they're not looking at you. They're digging their hole and hoping that no one's throwing dirt back into it. So if your idea of like, I want to go to work and it be 9 to 5 and it's just done when it's done, then I would say look at a bigger company. The bigger companies have much more defined, this is a path to success. You can turn off at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever, and just go about your life. When you're at a startup, some days you're on there for 24 hours. Some days you're off for 48 hours. You can kind of go do your own thing. But M&M's, like for that project, one of the things that we didn't really go into was the startup at that point, Blippar had shut down their India office. And the India team was the one that was actually producing some of the games. Like we were so backed up that we had to ask for help. We sent it out to the India team, and about 3 weeks before go live, we found out that they had shut down the India office and no one had worked beyond the first week of the project. So it became, okay, well, that's not going to happen. So who's going to do the work? And those 3 weeks, it fell on myself and my teammates. And we definitely had nights where we were up for, all night, showered, go back to the office the next day and continue. And it happens, but you can't let that happen all the time. If that's happening constantly, that means there's something broken with the culture at that startup. It's not unusual for it to happen here and there, but if you're constantly like just up all night and not taking care of yourself, you can get really sick and you can get really burnt out and you'll be miserable. You'll hate what you do, and that happens more often than not in the startup world. People get burnt out because they don't know how to set boundaries for themselves or be able to pull themselves back and look at the situation like, is this something that I did to get myself in a position where I'm working 24 hours a day? Or is this like, my manager is over-promising or I'm over-promising? Just looking at that and being able to identify when you're not happy and you're feeling burnt out, raise that to your team. And if they don't have a good response to you, then my advice to you is start quietly looking for a new role, because it's not gonna change. But if they hear you and they're willing to change things up, then that's a great environment to be in. And the second company that I was at, Agora, that's the kind of relationship I have with my manager. When I feel overwhelmed, I say, hey, this is just too much on my plate. Like, I'm not going to be able to deliver this. What should I prioritize? What can we move around so that I'm not feeling like I'm, go 7 days a week. And, like, you're of no value to anyone when you're in that position. You're not thinking clearly, you're not sleeping well. Red Bull is not your friend in that situation.
Thank you so much. So anyone have any questions? Anyone?
And if you don't have questions now, like, that doesn't mean you don't have questions tomorrow. So you can feel free to reach out to me. My email is hermes@agora.io. You can find me on Twitter, Hermes_F. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help and mentor and answer questions. Startup Week did a lot to help me in my career. So anything I can give back, I'm happy to do. So don't be a stranger.
Thanks so much. I really wish we could have you visit us physically, but well, there's a pandemic. So hopefully we will see you in next year's Startup Week as well, and in person.
For sure.
So,
I can't wait to make it back.
Yeah. So I guess that's it. So thank you everyone for attending this, and thank you very much to Hermes for sharing the experiences and the lessons and so on. We really appreciate your information and share the experiences.